So, I was working on my music mod and posting some progress of it to someone I knew. And, they were pretty excited about it and shit, but they did remark how one of the things they would have loved to see most was the R35 be brought back in a fully functional state. Now I, like probably many of you, have been aware of this car's existence for a long while now. It's essentially become public knowledge amongst Midnight Club fans that the R35 was this unfinished player vehicle that was just sitting around in the game's files. But exactly how unfinished is less commonly known. So, here's all that's wrong with the R35 in the final build of MCLA. The car's most glaring issue is its performance, topping out at a dazzling top speed of 99 miles an hour at a whole 5 gears. It taken around 17 days and 14 hours to go from 0 to 60. Not to mention that it has the agility of a tugboat. I don't know about y'all, but I wouldn't exactly call that competitive. But the laundry list of issues extend beyond just its performance, as the car has no sounds. It's simply using the engine noise of the last vehicle loaded into memory, meaning you can make it sound like this. You can't select parts for it in the garage. Whenever you purchased it from the showroom, it would look like a car if it were neurodivergent, and just like Madonna, it can be a little too revealing for comfort at times. Like, we don't need to see all that. Camera angles are also broken, and in the complete edition, you cannot select its stock rims. You'll be given whatever the hell this is. Now that's a pretty extensive list of fuck. So extensive, in fact, that once I had learned of this car many years ago, I had deemed it to be unsalvageable, expecting it to be relegated to nothing more than a novelty until the end of time. Simple fodder for cut content, or iceberg, or things you didn't know type of videos. Not something that any player could ever engage with in any viable way. Now, did I ever properly look at the files myself? Not really. I just kind of ran with the conjecture that this car was simply broken beyond repair. But that assessment was made many moons and global armed conflicts ago, and through making this music mod and becoming more intimately acquainted with MCLA's code and file formats, this one comment left me pondering. Was the R35 truly a lost cause? I decided to properly take a crack at the car's files myself. The first matter I wanted to address was its performance. Why did it handle like a Greyhound bus? To conjure up an answer to that, I had to figure out where exactly the performance data of the car was stored. In previous Midnight Club games, vehicle parameters like speed, handling, damage, and the like were stored in several plaintext files. There are 3 particularly important types of car data files concerning performance: vehicle simulation, vehicle gyro, and vehicle input files. In Midnight Club 2 and LA Remix, they were stored as simple plaintext files inside of the game's asset archive and were quite easy to edit. In Midnight Club 3, however, they were stored inside of the compressed PCK format, which are, and bear with me, compressed memory snapshots of files that are dumped straight into the game's RAM. So, instead of having a regular raw game asset that's interpreted by the game's memory only at runtime, they essentially skip that interpretation process by having those assets already be memory ready in the first place. It's a smart way of increasing loading speeds, but as far as modding goes, this format royally sucks dick, because it'll make it highly difficult, if not impossible in many cases, to reconstruct an original raw file back from those memory dumps, as when the game loads these assets in its memory, a lot of vital information that could be of use to reverse engineering certain file types get lost. It unfortunately is a one-way conversion, and unless you have an original raw file to use as some kind of reference or template, which we simply do not have for many of Midnight Club 3's files, it is extremely difficult to find a through line on how certain formats contained within these compressed PCK files actually are supposed to function. It is PCK that has proven to be the most surmountable obstacle to Midnight Club 3 modding. And LA as well, because, they brought it back. Yes! And as I suspected, the performance data of the R35, and by extension all of the vehicles, were kept inside a compressed memory file especially dedicated to storing vehicle parameters. A .ct file, CT standing for car type. And while a lot of it looked to be padding and gibberish, I did see a bunch of what looked to be float values, which are basically just a bunch of decimal numbers. However, there was no way to confirm what these values were supposed to represent, and there looked to be literal hundreds of them. And, Even someone like me, who doesn't much value their time on this planet, even I didn't have time for that shit. I did check the executable and managed to find the names of these specific parameters, but even then, there was no reliable way to map these names to the specific float values in the car type file, as they didn't seem to follow some kind of order or pattern. So, then I got an idea. What is the closest analogy to the R35 performance-wise? I figured the Audi R8 would be my best bet, as it shares the same drivetrain, has similar top speed, and the horsepower difference isn't too egregious. So, what if I just transplant the R8's car type data directly into that of the R35's? And lo and behold, it no longer handled like a cargo ship. So that was the performance fixed. Yay! That's it. We will definitely not get back to this at a later point. The next thing I looked at was the version of the car you would get whenever you bought it from the dealership. Like, why are you given this Lovecraftian looking monstrosity? Well, I quickly found out that the R35 had no default preset file. See, every vehicle in the game has a default preset that tells it what its standard parts, colors, and rims are when you first buy it. And whenever such a file is missing, the game will just decide to get creative. The preset file itself was made out of a bunch of hex codes, but once I recognized from having mucked about in Midnight Club 3 with Cheat Engine before. They were all just part and color ID slots. So all I needed to do is customize what would be an appropriate stock version of the car, and then transplant the part and color IDs in the live memory to the actual preset file itself. But in order to build a stock version of the car, I first needed stock rims, which is something the game wasn't keen on granting me. So I did some digging, and I found out that the names for all of the rims are stored in a plain text list that catalogs the model names for each and every tire, rim, and brake disc available and not available, such as placeholder and test models, rims that aren't purchasable, and as can be observed in the Day 1 release, rims for entirely unused cars. The R35's rims were in the Day 1's wheel list file, placed just below the R8's rims. In the complete edition, the R35's entry was removed entirely, resulting in the game not being able to locate the stock rims for the car. So I figured the solution was simple. Just reinsert the R35's rims back into the list. So I did. And yeah, now when you select the stock rims, they show up correctly. So I dusted off my hands and thought, okay, well, problem solved. Without realizing I had inadvertently created a domino effect that would cause unparalleled suffering and destruction to ensue. But let's put a pin on that for now. So after getting the rims to initially display, I decided to customize the R35 into what would have been an appropriate stock version. White metallic paint, and stock aftermarket parts, including the rims. I then went into the game's memory and took the values from this car I just made and transplanted it into a new preset car file. And now, you could almost catch a whiff of that new car smell, as the R35 now looked how it should whenever you bought it from the dealership. Well, barring one discrepancy. For some reason, this, shroud on the front bumper was orange, and for a very long time, I had no idea why. I eventually even accepted this to just be a UV or shader mapping mistake on the developer's part, despite the car's showroom image not showing this oddity. It was only later that I found out that these individual parts had RGB values assigned to them in the car preset file, and maybe a leftover to cut customization or something. Whatever the case may be, once I had figured this out, I managed to resolve the issue quickly. The car was now truly looking as beautiful and alluring as ever. And if I didn't have a girlfriend and were an objectophile, I would be doing some unsavory things with its exhausts, let me tell you that. I should probably purchase a Bible. Anyway, that was fixed. Now on to the aftermarket parts. So even though you can't select custom parts inside of the garage, people have over the years found out that the car does have a multitude of aftermarket parts, which you can force onto the car with Cheat Engine. But I figured, okay, these custom parts exist, so there must be a file that tells the game to look for and apply those parts onto the car, right? And yeah, there is. See, every vehicle in the game has what are called G-Tune or Garage Tune files. These dictate what and how many parts a car has. Most of the vehicles in the game share the exact same G-Tune files, as they have the same list of parts located in the same places of the car. So you may be thinking that they just deleted the R35's G-Tune files altogether. The models are there, so they must have just deleted the file that tells the game to source and apply those parts, right? Right? No, no. See, the R35's Garage Tune files exist. They just have no parts listed. Wow, that's really helpful. See, they modeled all of the parts and never got to a stage to where those parts could be made selectable. To be fair, they probably had some, internal debug car viewer where you could instantly preview and swap out parts on the fly. But considering most of the vehicles share the same exact G-Tune file, it's a bit crazy how they never got to Ctrl-C and Ctrl-Ving that Garage Tune file for the R35 as well. And so I did, and voila, all of the parts were now selectable from the garage and function well once equipped. Those were the most prescient of issues fixed, really. And all that in 2.5 hours. You could customize the car and actually drive the thing, which in and of itself was unprecedented, but my journey with this car had not yet met its conclusion. Namely, the car still didn't have proper engine sounds. It still just took the engine audio of the last vehicle you had driven. I originally was going to try and make all new sounds for it, but I ran into way too many complications trying to do this, and figured that, well, most of the cars share the same sounds anyway, so I may as well just stoop to this game's low standards. I compromised. I decided to make it use the R34 sound as I figured it probably would have been the closest comparison, as they both feature twin-turbo engines and are also of the same lineage. Okay, so, engine noises were fixed. What else? The damage. Rockstar never got to modeling the insides of this car, and the car's current damage model doesn't do a very good job at obscuring that fact, as its bumpers fall off quite quickly, exposing the player to the hollowness inside. Most of the cars in the game display damage in this way, with bumpers hanging off to the side and eventually detaching entirely. But there are a few select cars that deviate from this rule. One is the Lamborghini Murcielago Dub Edition, where the most you'll see are its trunk and hood pop out ever so slightly. And so I wondered if I could just Frankenstein that car's damage parameters into the R35's car type file. Since I didn't know what float values or variables handled the damage and deformation, the only thing I could do was open the game up in an emulator, find the R35's file in the game's memory, and transplant the Lambo's data live to see what would happen. A ton of game crashes later, and I'd finally figured out in what section of the file damage was being handled. I then inserted the Lambo's damage values directly into the R35's car type file, and now the car is a lot more modest in regards to what it's willing to show the player. I now had a fully functional R35, and I was ready to pack it up, release it, and leave it there. But in the back of my mind, something was gnawing at me. Isn't it kind of lame to have two vehicles in the game perform exactly alike? A week after getting the car to initially work and kind of just sitting on it as I tended to matters of international security, like shitting, something compelled me to look at the files of the PS3 version. I don't know what it was. Some divine intervention maybe. Perhaps God isn't a niche midnight club content. I'm not sure what it was, but what I will say is that what I had discovered in that version of the game was nothing short of a miracle. I noticed that the tune/vehicle folder on PS Triple contained hundreds of more files than on the Xbox release. All of these files were hashed and extensionless, so there was no way to infer what they entailed without opening any of them myself. And once I did, I shat my trousers profusely. These were XML files containing the intact vehicle parameters from before they were converted into that horrid car type file. At first, I got really excited knowing we would now be able to cross-reference the floats from these XMLs with the ones from the car type. So no longer were these numbers ambiguous in the car type file. We would now know what their exact purposes were. But then I realized that there were only 237 of these files. Now that may sound like a large figure upon first glance, until you realize that each car in the game has around 9 of these vehicle parameter files. The base game's roster of vehicles rounds up to 46, so there would have to be at least 414 files to encompass just the original game's car list. And when I tried brute forcing these hashes with car names from the base game, whose model names start with VP, I couldn't find any results. So I tried running a search for a DLC vehicle instead, which bared the VPD moniker instead of VP. the D standing for download, as in downloadable content, which you would know if you've seen my Midnight Club 3 video. And well, I found a match. I decided to look for another DLC car, another match, and another. It seems that all of these vehicle parameter files only concern the South Central exclusive cars. Then a random factoid hit me. See, they were planning on resurrecting the R35 for one of the South Central car packs, and had made an effort to do so, as text references to an updated version of the car can be found in the files of the Complete Edition, a model that went by VPD Nissan GTR 08, whereas we only have access to VP Nissan GTR 08. So I decided to run a search for the vehicle simulation file of VPD Nissan GTR 08. And blood rushed to the tip of my third leg instantaneously as I found a match. I then inspected the values of the file myself. Its specified mass was 1739 kilos, an extremely close, if not pretty much identical figure to the real car's 1740 kilos. It was all-wheel drive and had a horsepower of 480, which all checked out. Yep, this was it. They had tuned the R35 post-release, and we now have the actual tuning data for it. And when we transplant these values into the R35's car type file, it handles quite well, and feels properly distinct from the R8. It maneuvers nicely, being able to grip quite effortlessly through turns whilst retaining a lot of speed, making it a pretty viable option as far as B-class cars go. I was almost ready to now release the mod as is, and sent it to a friend of mine to review before I closed the curtains on this project. Unfortunately, it seems I am far from the most observant being to walk this mortal coil, as there were things that you could say kinda slipped through the cracks. Some major cracks, actually. The rims for many vehicles were just completely broken or incorrect now. The R8 now was sporting the R35's rims. Most of the South Central vehicles were missing brake discs or just rims entirely. And on top of that, South Central exclusive rims were broken when selecting custom ones from the menu. And that's pretty funny because I never messed with a single South Central related file. I let out a sigh loud enough that it reverberated the ground beneath me as my eyes rolled so far in the back of my head that they may just decide to stay there. Or perhaps they were there all along. Or in my ass. As I could have explained how I failed to see something so incredibly obvious. As I rubbed my forehead in frustration and wondered why it is I decided to embark on this project to begin with, an epiphany surged through my frontal lobe and rejuvenated me like a line of coke. Or a good beef doner kebab sandwich, with the garlic sauce and the chili sauce and the fresh vegetables and the juicy properly seasoned. Bam! So I had placed the R35's rims below that of the R8 in the wheel list file, and the R8's rims were the last rims to be listed in said file. Like I said earlier, the R8 was sporting the R35's rims. There was a connection here. And then I realized that each entry in the wheel list actually translates to a part ID that's specified in each car's preset file. So by placing the R35's rims below that of the R8, I had given it what would have been the ID for the R8's rims. And since I added a new line in the middle of this ID sequence, it shifted the entire hierarchy of wheel IDs, causing a rippling effect where every rim listed after the R35 would be given an incorrect ID that the preset files look for when purchasing a stock car. The next rims to be loaded by the game are the South Central rims, which explains why after this line, only the South Central wheels would break. That effectively meant I couldn't add new rims to the existing wheel list. Not even at the end, as it would start messing with the South Central cars. But then, that's precisely the thing. The South Central rims. I noticed that the South Central rims weren't cataloged in the same wheel list file as the base game's rims. Instead, being stored in a file with the same name, only now with a numeric value at the end. In this case, being 0001. They had developed MCLA with DLC in mind and had therefore made the process of adding things like new vehicle lists or new rim lists a very malleable thing. So naturally, I decided to make a file with an identical name, only now with 0002 at the end. My newly created file contained only one single entry, that being for the R35's rims. I had also reverted the base game's wheel list back to retail. Reverting the base game's wheel list file fixed all of the issues concerning incorrect rims on the vehicles. So that was good to know. But the real question would be, was the R35's rims gonna show up with this freshly added wheel list file? Yep. I quickly snagged its part ID and applied it to its stock preset car file. And now, everything was truly in harmony. The birds were singing Squadala. I had achieved inner peace. The R35 was now fixed. Well, I mean, you still can't select interior neon for whatever reason, but that's about it. I didn't make this mod all for myself though. What I do is a public service to all my Midnight Club homies. All the fans out there that want to see a new game but will never get one because making one game every 15 years is more profitable. And to all my Midnight Club brothers, you can now enjoy this car too, because I've linked a mod that fixes it in the description. I've made it work on both the 360 and PS3, and both are very easy and straightforward to install. You know, there's readmes that tell you what to do. It's, you know, you'll figure it out. I have even cooler videos in the pipeline, you feel me? You know, Midnight Club and not Midnight Club related, so be on the lookout for that. Donate to the Ko-fi if you want to support the homie. I bid you all a good day, much prosperity, and lots of bitches.